And that's when I understood something very important. Authenticity travels, authenticity connects, authenticity sustains. That realization stayed with me. And before I continue, I actually want to ask you something. And I want everyone to really think about this and raise your hand if you feel the same way. Have you ever watched a film about your culture, about your region, about your language, and felt, that's not me, that's not us? They don't really understand who we are. So, did anyone feel that way? Please raise your hand if you do. I see several hands there. All right, now let's look at the opposite side. Have you ever watched a story from a completely different part of the world, a culture that you don't belong to, a language that you don't speak, but it touched your heart so deeply that you thought, that's exactly how I feel? Have you ever felt that way when you saw a film? And this is the power of authentic storytelling. It crosses borders without losing its roots. It reflects the world without erasing its specificity. It reminds us that what is deeply cultural can also be deeply human. And that is why I want to begin today with a much bigger question. A question every nation, every community, every society must eventually ask. What is the most sustainable resource we have? Is it oil, technology, talent, innovation, data? All of these matter, but none of them last without something deeper. Because the truth is this: communities are not sustained by resources alone. They are sustained by meaning, and meaning lives inside stories. Stories are one of humanity's oldest renewable resources, more powerful than oil, more lasting than steel, and more influential than policy. Because stories decide how we see ourselves, how we see others, how we understand the world, and how we imagine our future. Because every civilization that survived because it protected its stories. And every civilization that collapsed first in narrative before anything else. That is why the theme of this year's summit, Knowledge Markets Developing Sustainable Communities, is so timely. Because if sustainability means future security, then storytelling is one of the most essential forms of long-term cultural security we have. This journey, this understanding, is what led me to develop what I call the authentic lens, a way of telling stories that protect cultural nuance, preserves identity, and strengthens community resilience. So when people ask me why I speak so passionately about cultural integrity, why storytelling feels like a responsibility, not just a career, I always think back to something that happened when I was a teenager, long before Australia, long before I even held a camera, when all I used to watch were Western films or South Asian films. I remember watching a full set in the Arab world, made entirely from a Western gaze. Everything felt wrong, from the way they dressed, their accents, their behavior, the emotional codes that they held. It made me feel misrepresented, and all in all, just made me feel empty watching it. And I remember thinking, if we don't tell our own stories, someone else will, and they will never get it right. The moment became the seed of authentic lens, a way of seeing, a way of listening, a way of preserving culture, not as nostalgia, but as living knowledge. And when I talk about authenticity, I mean representation. And by representation, I don't just mean by the presence of a culture. Representation is the accuracy of it. And so the authentic lens is built on 3 principles: truth, respect, and responsibility. It asks questions like, is this emotionally true? Is this culturally respectful? Is this representation responsible, or is it reinforcing something harmful? Because authenticity is not political correctness. Authenticity is precision. Authenticity is knowledge. Authenticity is cultural sustainability. When storytelling has integrity, it becomes a bridge. When it does not, it becomes a wall. And the lens rests on 4 pillars, 4 essential elements that shape how a story sustains a culture. So let's go through them, and with each one, I will give a cinematic example. The first pillar is character placement. Who gets to be seen? And when I talk about character placement, I'm meaning who is in the front of your story. So one of the most simplest and most powerful forms of cultural sustainability is storytelling, and storytelling comes from one question. Who do we choose to place at the center of our story? Who is seen? Who is marginalized? Who is silenced? Character placement is not a writing trick or a cinematic choice. It is a cultural choice and a human reprioritization. So let's take some examples, for example. First, we have Kafr Houm from Lebanon, where Nadine Lebki didn't center a wealthy politician, a hero, or a romantic lead at the center of her story. She centered a child, undocumented, unseen, unprotected. By placing Zayn at the heart of the story, of the narrative, she shifted global empathy. She forced the world to look at children we often choose not to see. This is the power of placement. It can rewrite what society pays attention to. And then we have the famous Al-Rawabi School for Girls, the Jordan series that wowed the world and became one of our most universally seen series on Netflix. In Al-Rawabi, the camera follows teenage Arab girls, not as background characters, not as stereotyped, but as complex protagonists navigating bullying, friendship, shame, power, and consequence. The series elevates voices that are traditionally seen or dismissed as too young, too emotional, or not serious enough. By centering them, the show says their inner lives matter. Their struggles are worthy of narrative space, and millions of viewers saw themselves in it. And then I want to take you to a personal project of mine, Al-Eid Eidain. In my own feature, Al-Eid Eidain, I chose to center something very specific. A Saudi Emirati family navigating identity, celebration, conflict, and reconciliation. Not royalty, not stereotypes, not extreme narratives. Just an ordinary Gulf family with humor, chaos, love, mistakes, and growth. Because ordinary people are rarely placed at the center of regional cinema, yet they are the ones who define our real cultural landscape. When we place them in the spotlight, we preserve the ecosystem of everyday life that often goes undocumented. So characters placement is not a writing choice, it's a cultural choice that we make. And then we go to the second pillar, which is gender and power, contextual empowerment. One of the biggest mistakes in Middle Eastern and global storytelling today is imported empowerment, writing Arab, South Asian, African, or Asian women with Western emotional logic. But empowerment without cultural context is not empowerment, it's distortion. And that is why I want you to shift your gaze to the next film case studies. We have the beautiful film Wajda from Saudi Arabia. Haifa al-Mansour didn't westernize the girl's struggle. She localized it. She made empowerment come from a bicycle, a school competition, a mother-daughter bond, and a quiet internal rebellion. The power was gentle but truthful. And because it was truthful, it became global. The world doesn't connect to stereotype, it connects to simplicity. And that is why this film has traveled across pounds, and even some festivals wanted to open Arab festivals just to premiere this film. And then we have the beautiful series Finding Ula from Netflix, the Egyptian drama that really took us to the lives of Egyptian women. When you see Finding Ula, you see a story of a woman rediscovering herself after divorce, not by rejecting her culture, but by navigating within it. Ula's empowerment grows from motherhood and responsibility, from community and friendship, emotional resilience, financial independence built step by step, and the courage to rebuild her identity at midlife. She doesn't tear down her cultural world. She moves through it, reshaping her life with humor, grace, and honesty. It reminds us that empowerment can be soft, steady, culturally rooted, and yet still transformative. And then I want to take you to a personal project of mine, which is my upcoming short film called The Other Cup. This is a fully Hindi-driven story set in Mumbai, and I wanted to explore a different, often overlooked dimension of empowerment, male vulnerability. The story talks about two estranged brothers who reunite after 10 years apart and are forced to confront grief, responsibility, and unspoken emotion. From them, empowerment isn't external success. It is finally allowing themselves to feel. Because gender and power is not just a woman's story. They are human stories. And when we respect cultural context, we allow both men and women to grow in ways that feel honest to their world. And then we shift to, so empowerment without context becomes distortion. And that's such a beautiful and very powerful thing that we need to heed before we start the story. And now to the next pillar, which is pillar 3, belief and value system, the emotional rhythm, the rhythm of a culture, basically. Belief, whether spiritual, religious, ancestral, or moral, is the heartbeat of most societies. But global cinema often reduces belief system to a costume, an obstacle, a joke, or a decorative detail on a set. The authentic lens demands we treat belief as a living rhythm, a guiding force shaping how people think, feel, love, and survive. And so, here are the 3 case studies I want to shift your focus to, which is, first we start with The Lunchbox from India, an often underrated, beautiful film about cultural identity, but made in a very soft and underrated way. The Lunchbox is deeply Indian, not through cliches, but through ritual. Food becomes the communication, silence as the emotion, tiffin boxes as love letters, loneliness expressed through routine. Nothing in the film announces its cultural specificity. It simply breathes it. This is belief and value systems at their finest, present not as exposition, but as lived experience. And then we have the beautiful animated animated film from Japan, Grave of the Fireflies. I don't know if anyone has seen it, but this was a very iconic film that I've seen on Spacetoon when I was young, and it stayed with me to this day. And the reason it stayed with me because this heartbreaking masterpiece is not about the war. It's about duty, sacrifice, sibling responsibility, shame, honor, and the profound moral weight carried by children in a society shaped by ancestral values. The film never explains these values, it embodies them. In gestures, silence, loyalty, pride, and grief. It is a reminder that belief systems can be felt without being spoken. And finally, I want to talk about a film of mine. Actually, it's still in the development stages. It's a script. It's not been produced yet, but it won multinational awards as a script alone because my script, Newell, which talks about 2 brothers who got separated within the Syrian conflict, one navigating life as a refugee in Turkey, while the other stuck in a war-torn country. Here, we see the belief not represented as a rule or a restriction. It is a source of identity, stability, and emotional code, especially for young people navigating trauma, social dynamics, self-discovery, and survival. The characters carry unseen value systems, loyalty, shame, resilience, hope, faith, and dignity. Their internal battles are shaped not just by emotion, but by the cultural frameworks they inherit. Even before being produced, Noor resonated globally because its value system were very specific and therefore universal. It's basically humanity on a plate. And so values define emotion, truth more than dialogue does. And that's something that we really need to pay attention to when we're developing scripts, when we're developing stories, or when we're sharing stories with people. And now, to the last pillar, which is pillar 4, geography as identity. The environment is a character grows up in, is not just a backdrop, it's a blueprint. The sea creates a different kind of person than the desert. The desert creates a different kind of person than the city. And the urban chaos shapes different values and ruler silence. Geography is memory, geography is emotion, and geography is identity. When people say the UAE has no stories, I smile because our geography alone carries centuries of emotional intelligence. And that is why geography needs to be seen as a second character, not as just a placement or backdrop for the character to live in. And so that's why I want to showcase these beautiful 3 films that shows that in the most beautiful way. First, we'll have Lion, a co-production between Australia and India. And in Lion, the landscapes are emotional mirrors. Kolkata is chaotic, overwhelming, fragmented. Tasmania is calm, isolated, and hauntingly beautiful. The protagonist's sense of self is literally shaped by traveling across continents, by the contrast between environments, and by the memory of place. The land becomes a character, both confronting and painful. And then we have the beautiful film In the Mood of Love by Wong Kar-wai from Hong Kong. Wong Kar-wai uses Hong Kong like poetry. Narrow corridors, dim hallways, rain-soaked alleys, apartments pressed closely together. The environment creates the emotion of repression, proximity, longing, nostalgia. Geography shapes morality, and geography shapes behavior. The characters move like the city moves, slow, crowded, withheld. This is geography as emotional architecture. And then finally, we have the beautiful film Deep from Jordan. Deep is a film where the Jordanian desert becomes a teacher. The vastness, the silence, the danger, the brotherhood. The landscape shapes the boy's courage, ethics, choices, and maturity. You understand the Bedouin code simply by watching how they walk through their land. This is not exposition. The geography speaks for them. And so place is character, landscape is identity. And so what happens when authenticity is lost? Now let's be honest. When authenticity is lost, stories do more damage than any policy ever could. Because let's give some examples of how that happens. Hollywood desert scenes filmed in Arizona labeled Middle East. Generic Arab-sounding music whenever an Arab enters a room. Every Indian character is either a call center worker or a romantic hero. Every African narrative framed around poverty. Every Chinese character as a tech genius. Every Muslim woman as oppressed. And every Arab man as angry or wealthy. These portrayals have shaped global perception more deeply than news. This is dangerous knowledge because knowledge creates stereotype. Knowledge sustains misinformation, and knowledge that misrepresents entire societies damages severely. If bad storytelling can cause harm, imagine what good storytelling can do. And that is why when it comes to my own personal work, I make sure that every project I create, from comedy to drama to intimate character studies, begins with one commitment: to show our people in their full emotional range, gentle, complex, flawed, human. Because authentic representation is not accuracy, it's belonging. And belonging is cultural sustainability. And looking at the global large market of storytelling, when we look at that market of storytelling and we look at the streamers and the studios behind it, we always ask, why are Netflix, Amazon, Apple, and global studios investing so aggressively in regional stories? Because they learned something. Local truth equals to global impact. Korean stories did not go global by becoming Western. They went global by becoming more Korean. Nigerian stories went global by becoming more Nigerian. And Indian content skyrocketed by becoming more Indian. So authenticity is not a barrier. Authenticity is a multiplayer. When a story is rooted deeply, it travels widely. This is knowledge economics, the emotional economy of truth. And so when we dive into how to create a story that showcases authentic lens and maintains cultural integrity, well, I personally look at 5 models that I use when developing stories. And it's the foundation of everything I create, from comedies to dramas to even docuseries. Because this model answers one central question: how do we tell stories that are emotionally universal, culturally precise, and socially responsible? And each step protects a culture's identity while giving the story global resonance. So let's start. The first practice is we should listen before we imagine. What does that mean? Basically, stories are built on observation before imagination. Every culture has its own emotional temperature, its own rhythm, its own unspoken codes in how people speak, joke, gesture, forgive, greet, and grieve. We cannot invent that. We must witness it. Listening removes the outsider's assumptions that create stereotype. And so before we write a single word, we must first listen. Not to respond, but to understand. Spend time in the community. Observe the pauses, the humor, the silences, the body language. Observe the details that never make it to the script. The way that people pour their tea, the way the way they greet elders, the way they argue, the way they soften, the way they forgive. You cannot represent a world you haven't listened to. Listening is research, listening is respect, and listening is story. And when you listen deeply, the story naturally becomes true. And then we need to co-create whenever possible. Cultures cannot depict from a distance, cannot be depicted from a distance. It must be co-created with the people it portrays. Because authentic stories are not extracted, they are built with, not built about. So invite voices from within the culture, women, elders, youth, workers, immigrants, creatives, and the people that are often overlooked. Let them read the script. Let them challenge your assumptions. Let them guide you into emotional truths you may never have lived. Co-creation is not outsourcing, it's partnership. It produces stories that feel lived in, not observed. Because co-creation transforms representation from observation to participation. It ensures the culture is not just present, it is alive within the story. And when a culture participates, it becomes present on screen in a real way. And then always question your gaze. Every storyteller carries a lens shaped by upbringing, privilege, class, nationality, gender, trauma, and distance. If you don't examine that lens, if you don't question your gaze, you impose it uncautiously, and your story will inherit your blind spots. So ask yourself this: what privilege do I hold? What biases do I carry? What assumptions do I project? What access do I have or lack? Where am I the outsider and where am I the insider in this? The authenticness is not about perfection. It's about awareness and allowing that awareness to shape the story. And this step prevents flattening, exaggeration, or romanticizing. When you interrogate your perspective, you give the culture room to define itself. And you protect your characters from becoming mirrors of your assumptions. And then we must honor complexity. Cultures are not monolithic, they are layered. People are not symbols, they are contradictions. Communities are not one-dimensional. When storytellers oversimplify, they create stereotypes. When they honor complexity, they create humanity. So if your story reduces people to the good one, the villain, the oppressed, the exotic, the modern one, you have flattened a whole world that deserves depth. So you need to show that duality, show humor alongside struggle, show strength and vulnerability, and show tradition and evolution coexisting. Allow your characters to contradict themselves, and let communities have nuance, tension, humor, and depth, because complexity is what makes representation feel real, not performative. And complexity is not confusing, it is honest. And honesty is what audiences connect to the most. And finally, emotion is your universal language. This is the final step of the bridge. Cultures differ, customs differ, value systems differ, but emotion is borderless. Even when cultures are different, fear, love, grief, longing, shame, hope, and joy are universal. For example, a mother's fear, a child's loneliness, a brother's guilt, a woman's quiet courage, a man's unspoken grief. You don't need to explain all of those elements when emotional clarity does that for you. Because these truths need no translation, it is felt. And when a story is emotionally precise, culturally grounded, and human at its core, it becomes global without trying to be global. So basically, emotion is how you make the hyper-local into the relatable, and thus making it universal. Emotion is how cultures speak to each other without speaking the same language. And emotion is what makes audience say, that isn't my culture, but that is my feeling exactly. So when you root the story in emotion, the world understands it, no matter where it comes from. So to summarize this whole section, all you need to do is this: listen, include, reflect, complicate, and feel. These are the 5 models to creating the authentic lens. And now, I want to take this moment to share something that happened actually yesterday. I was teaching a workshop for the authentic lens, and I had participants from different parts of the world. I had people from Africa, from Latin America, from South Asia, from the Middle East, from Europe, and from the UAE. And at one point, I asked a simple question: Can you name a film that truly represented your culture either accurately or inaccurately? And you know what happened? What happened was super powerful because every single person in that workshop, every single one, could instantly recall a film that misrepresented them, a film that flattened their society, a film that reduced their people to a stereotype. But not one person, not one single person could recall a film that represented them correctly. And that moment stayed with me because it showed me that misrepresentation is not a regional problem. It's a global experience, a global loss, and a global silence. And so now I want to ask you, and I want you to be really honest. When was the last time you saw your culture represented accurately on screen? What story about your community do you wish the world understood better? What stereotype about your people do you want eliminated forever? And if your grandparents' stories disappear tomorrow, what part of your identity disappears with them? Think about it. There's so much to tell and so much not seen from our culture. And these are not artistic questions, these are sustainable questions. We really need to think about these words because tomorrow the future is all relying on our shoulders to tell what happens, what is preserved and what is not preserved. Because every story you preserve is a cultural asset, and every story you neglect is a cultural extinction. So if we want sustainable communities, we must first build sustainable storytelling ecosystems. The UAE has laid this foundation beautifully through museums, funds, creative zones, talent programs, and multicultural openness. But the next decade requires something deeper: narrative sovereignty. A nation must control its story. A community must protect the story, and a culture must honor its story, not to isolate, but to contribute to the world with clarity, confidence, and pride. So let me leave you with this. Stories are the only bridges that never decay. They survive wars, migration, pandemics, revolution, and time. Because of that, the cultures that know how to tell their stories become the cultures that define the future. This is the authentic lens. This is cultural sustainability. And this is the heart of knowledge societies. Thank you. And now if anyone has any questions, I'm open to answer. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, okay.
Sorry everyone. Thank you, Maitha. I will ask you in Arabic. كيف أحول هذا الجمال اللي أنا سمعته من الأفلام إلى القصة المكتوبة؟ هل هناك رسالة أسمعها منك؟ ممكن تعيدين السؤال للجميع عقب؟
So basically he's asking how to translate all of this talk that we spoke about into a beautiful message in a film, I think, or in a رسالة.
Yes, in a written.
In a book. In a book way. Okay. So the problem we face, sorry, I'm going to answer in English. The problem we face is we don't have enough stories, especially from the UAE, that represent us in a good way. We need to first build on that before we can delve deeper and showcase what we mean by authentic voice, authentic lens. Because the stories that we show are beautiful, but they're mostly genre stories like, horror stories, paranormal stories. Stories that is over-traumatizing social dynamics, family dynamics. But we never showcase stories that showcases the everyday woman living her life, the everyday man struggling to survive in this economy, the stories of our ancestors that moved and migrated to the UAE and built this beautiful nation together and expanded it, the cross-cultural multinationals that call this place home, yet their voices are never heard on screen. So I feel that for us to be able to document and turn into to a book, we need to delve deeper in these stories, and we need to showcase them to the world so that they can understand what we mean by authentic representation, especially from the Middle East. Because what we're pushing out from the Middle East right now is more westernized than localized, and that needs to be changed. Because when I was in America and I was part of the South by Southwest for the Dubai Future Foundation, we were talking about the storytelling in the Middle East, and a lot of people ask, and that's just someone from the Arab American Council. He was like, Maitha, how can we get more Arab films from that from the Middle East back to America. We want to see them. Our people want to see where they grew up, want to see their stories, want to feel represented in some way. I was like, we have those stories, but nobody's asking for them. Nobody's pushing them abroad because they feel that if they did, they might not get the reception. Because in the end, show business is part entertainment and part business. And people think more about the business side of it than the entertainment or the showing. And we need to change that. I think we need more cultural campaigns to push our stories out there, collect the best representing pieces of Arab cinema and make it travel the world. This is how Korean cinema became famous. This is how Indian cinema became famous. And I think that that's the first step. We need to build on the film scene because we don't have a production, an industry right now. We have a scene and we're slowly expanding it, but there are so much limitations that we can tell and we can't produce because people till this day don't think Emirati cinema is strong enough because of audience. But this is the thing. If you make stories that travel, if you make stories that have substance and has subtitles to travel, then people would look at us and say, this story's value. And another thing is we need to also start including cross-cultural stories within our stories. UAE is not just made of Emiratis or Arab, it's made by a beautiful, diverse pool of 200 nationalities in one place. Why can't we show their stories alongside us? An Emirati woman with an Indian neighbor, tell that story. Why can't we show that? It's so beautiful.